Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the White Colored Lenses Show. I am your host, Aaron Percoco, registered mental health counseling intern in the state of Florida. Today, I would like to delve more into my grad school experience. I mentioned last week just some of the issues I had from an intersectional perspective in terms of my growth and like where I was at when I started the program and where I kind of ended up at as a result of a lot of work I had to do. But I wanted to kind of expound upon my experience more because I think it could be helpful to a lot of um, male therapists who share my intersectionality. Um, and the fact that my intersectionality even changed throughout the course of my grad school experiences in terms of the identities I discovered about myself or reshaped. I think that's an important aspect too, because like the work you do and the growth you will encounter inevitably depending on the kind of program you go to, um, it really does shape you quite differently. So I think it's helpful to start prior to grad school in terms of my undergrad experience, where um, I went to the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and which is a directional college in obviously Greensboro, North Carolina, which is in the research triangle of the middle of the state, including Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill, I believe. Um, Essentially, it is a city, it is a part of the country, it's part of the state essentially. Um, that has a lot of civil rights history baked into it. The Greensboro sit-ins that occurred there were a monumental part of the school's culture, um, as well as the Black student population really wanting to own that and wanting to champion for that history at school. Now, I say it started undergrad, but I think it's also indicative of where I was at when I even started grad school or undergrad, how I was before I even got to upper level education. Like, I was raised in a conservative white household. I went to private schools for the vast majority of my life until my last 2 years of high school when I went to public school and did not encounter very many people that were not like me in a lot of ways. Um, I we were not a city that had a lot of diversity in Asheville, or one it wasn't quite as present as it has bloomed into now. Um, Maybe it has been, and that's another aspect of privilege. Like I didn't see it, so I didn't know it existed. But I was, I was as white as can be, as Christian as can be, like just heteronormative culture to the max. Didn't really think about people outside of myself much. Didn't really question that kind of stuff about the color of my skin, the way I present as a human. And through those experiences, I didn't have a lot of culture, and I wanted that. I wanted to know more about people, and that's why I went in as a sociology major um, to get my bachelor's degree. People always fascinated me, but they always confused me, and I thought, the literal study of human interaction, I think, would be a beneficial area of study. So, at least for me. So I went through or I keep saying grad school. I had to go through undergrad first. Um, I was in a lot of classes where I was one of few white people for the majority of my college career. And that really, the subject material on its own, where we have to examine um, so many different aspects of our humanity and so many different aspects of how humans interact with each other, including oppressors and those who are oppressed, um, and our identities within that. It opened me up to so much. And one class in my senior year was called oh, I can't remember the specific name of it. It says essentially it was African American diaspora and understanding ourselves in relation to black people and black people understanding themselves in relation to themselves. But it was so informative, and I took the class really seriously. And my professor was somebody who had done a lot of field research with the Crips, or a lot of organized gangs, and was, a very tough, very hardened individual, but he approached it with such tact and such grace that I really appreciated. And at one point in class, I said I thought my school was uh, a predominantly black institution, and the people in my class were they laughed, obviously, um, but at the same time, my experience was I've only really ever had classes with majority people of color. Um, and so my experience in relation to those at the school was very different because I was not having like the typical like majority classroom experience where everyone looked like me. It was quite the opposite. And that me questioning that, it really was like, oh, I have so much more to learn. I have a lot to really open up to. And I was really grateful for it. So fast forward to, and that was fall of 2019 into 2020, um, when the world ended, essentially, for a good, I still don't know that it ever actually recovered, but it's really hard for me to talk about this just because I haven't had to sit with it for so long. But I came into grad school so raw, but so wanting to know and to hear about people's experiences that weren't mine. And I was so excited to interact with people because it changed how I look at so many things. And I was the archetype of person who was like, my best friend is black, how can I be racist? And because my roommate throughout or the beginning of undergrad, he's black, and we had a really great friendship. And towards the end of that, when we kind of had separated and distanced ourselves, like I wanted to rekindle that with him, but I also wanted to know about him as a human, like outside of being my friend. I asked him, we had lunch. I was like, I'm learning so much, and it's not your responsibility to teach me, but I want to know, like, as your friend, like, what is it like having been raised in rural North Carolina as a black person? Like, what are your interactions like? And he just kind of recounted his experiences to me, that they weren't too harrowing like some people's, but he still had so many things he had to combat, and he was just upfront with me. And I really appreciated his vulnerability in that time, but it's not our responsibility. It's not people of color's responsibility to teach us. Like there's so much research available. There's so many books written already. Like we have to do it on our own, and that's something I learned in grad school as well. But fast forwarding to being like actually in grad school, like we had the summer off. Like I didn't start school until August of 2020, but in the interim of that was, the George Floyd murder and Black Lives Matter movement really taking shape, or being extremely salient um, in the media. And I didn't know how to interpret it at the time. Like it was just, I was like, oh my God, this is so awful. Like I don't, you learn about police brutality in the courses I took going to undergrad and learning about sociology in that way. Like you learn about social inequity. You learn about how your role in society has shaped so many other people's, like as a white person, and especially as a white man. And from that standpoint, it was like, oh my God, this is heartbreaking. Holy shit. Like, what do we do about this? And like, or where do we go from here? And it was, you know, a considerably pivotal time to be a therapist at that, or starting your therapy career at that time. At the same time, it was really challenging to go in blind, essentially, as to how other people would perceive me in that role, where I was ready to be friends with everyone, to empathize with everyone, to learn everybody's everything. Essentially, I wanted to know about everyone because I felt it was really important. Um, and that was good for about a month and a half, I would say. There was a lot of um, we learned the difference between calling in and calling out, and there was a lot of calling out to start, in terms of language used and slip ups or social corrections that needed to be made. That, especially in my case at least, I didn't know were things that needed to be made. And I'm not somebody who takes rejection particularly well. So all of those instances where I'd like fuck up, um, or say the wrong thing, offend somebody, it hurt me because I don't obviously want to hurt people. Like my goal is to never do harm. I'll say shit, but I won't hopefully cause harm. But I learned I caused harm quite a lot actually. Um, just in the way I'd frame things and my naivety to certain situations that I didn't need to open my mouth about. But there was a lot of beating down that I felt in that time, and I don't ask for anybody's sympathy or empathy. It's just what happened. Um, and we were a cohort who really wanted to be strong. Like we really wanted to be together, and like we really wanted to like start off like we all want to be friends. We all want to be like this united unit and fight the forces of evil as therapists. And that shit fell apart. So, um, we got very, uh, oh, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of it right now. Clicky, but also just there was a clear divide in how the program was being interpreted and by people. And I was somebody who I didn't know where I fell in with that. I just wanted to, I wanted to befriend everybody. I wanted to do my best, obviously as a student, but I wanted to be present for everybody. I wanted to just be maybe something I wasn't, but I was told, pretty much immediately, like I came across as disingenuous because I was so like I was just like nodding my head a lot, and I didn't even know that, but um, nobody took me seriously because I was just so like, yeah, like, but that wasn't it wasn't out of a state of disingenuousness. I was actually just excited for people to talk and to be like hopefully on the same cognitive plane as me and to conceptualize things the way that I did. Um, and so I learned quickly I wasn't really safe at grad school. I've, thankfully had really good friends in that time, but the program itself did not feel entirely safe. And that came as a result of we wanted to do a lot of outside activities together to build rapport and to build camaraderie and things like that. But we had a party at a friend's house, all of us. It was the Halloween party. Um, and there was an instance with me and another friend of mine. We were having a very fluid conversation. We were having it was a drunk conversation. Like we were both lubed up. Terrible, terrible way to say that. But we were both intoxicated. We were both having a very open conversation about lifestyle and human sexuality, things of that nature. And someone who was not a member of the cohort told their partner about the conversation I was having. And then that came across as me grooming my friend. And I didn't know that at the time because I was just naively having a conversation with somebody I cared about and was like, holy shit, we're connecting on a very different level. Like, this is really cool. Um, and at the time, I didn't know I was autistic. But knowing how I relate to humans and the depth of connection that I need with people to have like real actual conversations instead of surface level conversations, it just was like, oh, it just opened up like everything. It felt so natural, and um, it was a conversation I felt was being reciprocated. Um, so the following week at school, that person whose partner had told them went around asking the femme presenting people of my program if they felt safe around me, and like asked all of them. It was 12 to 12 masked versus femme people, and I was approached by that person, and the way I interpreted that information was like, you are doing this, like you are actively grooming somebody. And I got really defensive, which did not look great. Because I was one, confused, and two, like I was hurt that this was being said about me, um, because I know who I am as a human, and I think a vast majority of people I've interacted with would say that's a congruent image of who they know. But I know inherently too, like some people will hear this information and be like, I don't believe you. You were doing it. And um I can't not let you think that, or I can't prevent you from thinking that. That's yours to hold. I can't change your mind if that's the interpretation. All I can do is say this is where I was at with it. Um and it caused me to have um a really bad time, and I really went hard on the internalized white male rage, and I'm not proud of myself for how I acted in a lot of ways. I caused a lot of discord. I caused a lot of um, division on my own just from the anger I had. And when I'm angry, um, I make everyone else miserable, and I hate that about myself. It is just a fact of the depth of emotion that I have is that I can make anybody have the best time. I can make anybody have the absolute worst time. And so that's why I try to live like um Bruce Banner in the Avengers. Like I'm always angry. Not in terms of I'm constantly seething with rage, but like that's just an aspect of my existence that I own. And I am somebody who is quick to anger. I'm also not somebody who is quick to lash out. I just get angry at myself more often than not. But I'm recounting this story to whoever wants to listen, because there were people who believed me, um, and who took up for me, and I'm really appreciative of that. And there were femme people who did that too, and we're like, "What are they talking about? Like, what? We saw what happened. Like, that wasn't what was happening." I was like, "Okay, well, like that's reassuring, but the damage was done. Like it was really hard to pull myself out of that mindset, and what I wanted out of my grad school experience was absolutely shattered. I realized I was not going to have the kind of camaraderie that I wanted, and as somebody who was seeking so much connection at that time, did not. I knew that was not going to be accessible anymore. Um, and so much of our course work in grad school, because my program was catered differently than most therapy programs. Like it's not for those who aren't there yet or don't know, or are curious. Like there are a couple of different ways that therapy programs are set up. One is you just go learn the information, you regurgitate it, you learn about theory, you learn about different modalities, different interventions, and then you take a test and you regurgitate it all and you become a therapist. Um, so you learn how to cognitively be a therapist. My program was set up as what's called a transformational model, where we did a lot of self-reflection and we did a lot of um, internal work on ourselves. So much of our coursework, our assessments were predicated on examine yourself within this whatever we're learning right now. And I'm a very introspective person as it is, so I was built for that. I was I was never going to have a hard time with that kind of academic structure because I constantly think about myself in relation to other people, and that is an aspect of autism. But it is uh, how to frame it. Also, I'm not going to edit anytime um I have brain farts because I think it's important that people see like it's okay that everything's not buttoned up and polished. Like this is how I think. Um this is how I interact with the world. And my brain is like, oh shit, what was I thinking? Like I'd rather people see that than some manufactured edited shit that doesn't actually represent me as a human. So I'll pivot. That coursework was never going to be challenging for me, essentially, and it showed. Like grad school was not hard academically; it was hard socially. um, But because so much of our modality was based on social justice, it it made me have to examine myself. And there were so many people who were on the opposite side of like, um, these are how white men have hurt me in the past, and recounting their stories and the abuse they endured. And it was so hard to listen to that and not think of it as me in that story, because I'm a hyper empathetic human as well, to a detriment at times. And I didn't know how to displace that anger of like, I didn't do this shit to you. Like, I didn't, but you're so mad, and I can't help but feel you're mad at me for existing. And it took me so long. I didn't learn this until after I graduated. It's just, it's not about you. It's never been about you unless you actively harmed the person who is talking. I say this um to all my white male therapists, or just white men in general. Like, rarely are you the cause of harm in that situation, unless you are actually, unless you 100% cause this person harm. They are recounting a story that resembles you, but that it isn't you. That you can see yourself in, but that's also an aspect of empathy. Is like, I see myself within this person's pain and their story, and that's important, because you can choose to be mad and be like, you're mad at me, or you can say, this person's just hurting and they are recounting something awful that happened to them. It's not about me right now. This is about them processing their shit and being vulnerable. And it's not about your anger in this situation. Like, you can process like how you felt in that story later. Or if you can examine yourself in the moment and be like, why do I feel, why am I so mad? Like, why am I so angry? Like, why, like, I didn't do this. If you think anything like me in those moments, take solace in the fact that it is not about you. And if this is a person who is like, um, like, kill all men and like very anti man, different story. That's not for you to work on with them either. Like, all you can do is be yourself. And all you can do is exist in the way that you feel is genuine and authentic as a man, as a somebody who presents as a man. So it was really challenging to hear those stories, and I just felt awful because I'm also somebody who had been told I looked like somebody who hurt them. Like, I got told my sophomore year of college, like, you look like the guy who raped me. And that hurts. It's not, it's, you didn't do that. Like, I didn't know this person. But to know that you resemble something that actively harms and causes this person strife is a really hard thing to swallow and to internalize. But it's also not for you to internalize. Like, you may represent something to that person, but you didn't do it. You didn't do that. You exist as an effigy, let's say. Like, you represent pain to that person, but you didn't cause that person pain. And that's something I had to learn too. And I'm not even sure that's like the quote unquote right thing to know about that situation. But I asked a TikTok mutual a while back, like, I'm having a really hard time with this kind of discourse. How do I support women talking about their sexual assault experiences? Like, how do I support y'all without feeling like it's my fault? And that's the person who told me it's not about you. Like, you can't go in with that mindset, and it's just about being angry. It's just about expressing raw emotion that is allowed to exist, and it doesn't have to be about any particular person. They're just recounting their pain. They're recounting their story. This is them processing. And it really made so much sense in the moment. I wish I had known that in grad school. I truly do. Um, but it also made me so much more empathetic of what was going on as well. Like, I wanted to know, like, about especially about police brutality, because that was just it was so present in our media. Not that it isn't still, but like it was such a time with it, especially like with, and I think specifically of Elijah McCain, um, McClain, like didn't wasn't confirmed autistic, but like had a seemingly autistic presentation and who was killed mercilessly. And the way it was recounted, it like it breaks my heart still thinking about it. But um, I didn't need that kid to be autistic for me to see myself in in that situation of empathizing and being wholly like just what would I do in that situation if I because I have a hard time articulating myself when I'm distressed. Um, I come across as I don't make eye contact, like I don't look at my camera. That's seen as shifty behavior. That's seen as dishonest behavior. When that's just like that's how I process information. So to be black and then have those communication deficits, that there's no shot and there's no chance there. And I wanted to know. I wanted to know how to empathize in a way that I hadn't before. And it made me so much less selfish, I would say. Um, in terms of my seeking my own gratification and my own, you know, self-actualization. I really, it taught me to champion for people in so many different ways that I hadn't before. And I was fortunate to have a professor who I went to in that time who was also a white male therapist. And I asked him, I was like, how do you succeed in this field? Knowing everything that's going on, what kind of work do you have to do? Because he's also like me. He was a snarky asshole, and we vibed in a lot of different cognitive areas. And I know the way I present can be off-putting too, but in a therapy setting, like how do you achieve what you want to, especially as a researcher, like in terms of group work, in terms of uh, collaboration. And he gave me a book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire, and kind of explained like your job is not to like change how white people are viewed in the societal discourse. Like if you choose to fight for people, like you amplify their voices. You don't take the voice away from them and then speak for them. Like you use your your I guess your whiteness, if you will, like because that is the launching point of so many more people will listen to you by proxy of your intersectionality. That this the things that need to be recounted and the things that need to be in the social discourse won't be listened to unless you mention them and unless you advocate for them, which is so shitty. But it is also it's a truth. Um, and so he described it as being the mouthpiece for people of who are disenfranchised and marginalized. I know we don't that word's kind of going out, but speaking with people and helping their voices be heard more so than they would be on their own, which is it's such a backhanded way of approaching it, but it's where we're at if we want societal change. And in terms of just moving forward with the program, like I was so jaded and so disillusioned about what therapy actually was and um hearing of like there's a separate aspect of like we're taught to work with everybody, right? Like we're taught to work with every diagnosis under the sun essentially. You specialize in a few that you feel especially competent in, but you're also expected to be a therapist for anybody who walks through your door and or who wants to work with you. And that idea is more of a community mental health aspect rather than a private practice aspect. So community mental health, you don't really get to decide who you work with, and they largely don't get to choose who they work with either, the clients, patients. So you're going to have cultural differences, you're going to have intersectional differences. And that's really helpful in a lot of ways, but it can also hinder progress too. It exposes you to a lot of cultural competence issues that you need to be up on for sure. Um, but at the same time, your ability to work with that person might be hindered just because you don't have similar life experiences as them, and that's okay. If you can achieve work, if you can achieve some level of work together, awesome. But the likelihood that that person gets everything they could possibly need from you in that therapeutic setting is very minimal. So I had a hard time thinking like, well, who's gonna want to come see me? Like, who is gonna contract me in this? Because I already knew I was gonna be a private practitioner because that was just the route I wanted to go. Um, and I'll get into why the like where those parallels meet, but in terms of my decision making. But I knew like a black queer person was not gonna see my page on Psychology Today and be like, that's the person I want to work with. Like, not that it can't happen, it's just unlikely. And that's okay because that person deserves somebody with a similar lived experience who will be able to empathize on an even more intimate level with them as to like the things they've endured and their hardships or just their way of thinking. I can only get so far. And there's a difference between cognitive empathy and emotional empathy. Like cognitively you can put yourself in that person's position and be like, this is how I would feel. Like this is I can understand why you think that. That's starkly different than somebody who's lived that themselves and can be like, I remember that pain. I remember how viscerally that felt. And to not make it about them in that moment, but like to be like, this is a shared experience that you are safe enough to have with me. And that's beautiful. And I think that's really what therapy needs to be is more communal, relational relationships with our clients and vice versa. Like your client is, if you're in a private practice setting, they're paying you. You want them to get the best outcome. If you don't think you're going to give them the best outcome, then that's not going to be a helpful financial investment for them either. And it's our duty to be like, let's put you with somebody who you are going to get the best help with, and like, let's figure that out. That's a big aspect of our jobs. So, huh, I'm not really sure what else I want to say about this experience, but like I I hated grad school. And that's on me for a lot of it. But I'm also grateful to grad school because of what I did have to go through. I had to learn how to grow in those moments. I had to build a lot of resilience. I had to learn how to be okay with myself in a way that I hadn't before. And I was somebody who was still very insecure, and I was still somebody who went in like wanting to people please and wanting to be everybody's best friend and like to be liked by everybody. And I no longer have that expectation of myself. And that took a lot of work. But you, to whoever's listening, no matter what, how you present to the world, if you're a therapist, if you're not, if you're my friend, if you are somebody who's literally never seen me before, um, and then you're curious about this work and you're curious about what it's like to be, a therapist in this realm with this intersectionality, with this outward presentation. Um, you can't ignore it. You cannot ignore the color of your skin. You cannot hide your outward presentation to the world. Like it carries weight. It just does. We can't do the colorblind shit. Like, it doesn't. It helps nobody to do that. We need to see ourselves in relation to our race. We need to see ourselves in relation to our creed. We need to see ourselves in relation to our sexual orientation, our gender presentation. Those are important aspects of our humanity, but they also carry a lot of weight for other people in that regard too. And so I don't really know how to finish this, but to those listening who are upset at how the world is treating white men, we have no right to be upset. We don't. This course correction is entirely necessary. Um, we need societal change on such a macro scale regarding the patriarchy, heteronormativity, white privilege. Those things need to shift. And the only reason you feel like you're being oppressed is because you've been the norm for so long. It's hard when your privilege is now being created in a sense like other people are having equitable lifestyles and getting the rights that they deserve that somehow they we got away with depriving people of. And it hurts because you're not special anymore. And you nobody deserves to be special, but like this is a time where we as especially therapists like we should want this for the community. We should want people to succeed. Like we should want equitable wealth and health. Like if you don't want those things, like I don't know that you're in the right profession, frankly. Um, but it takes a lot to learn that too. It takes a lot to unpack your white privilege and unpack your and there's so much white privilege in therapy too, and I'll get into that in another episode. But for those who have considered themselves in relation to their race, or in as their presentation as a white male therapist, like you're doing the work. You don't need to show people that you're doing the work. As long as you know you're doing it, you can't make everybody happy. All you can do is know that you're doing your best, living authentically. You're gonna fuck up. You're gonna inherently offend people. Um, it's not entirely on you. Like you can take accountability where possible, but that's their journey. You have yours, and you're gonna do the best that you can. And um, I approach you and I give you grace and love and light, and I want better for all of us too. Like I want better for our community just the same. And we are people who have suffered at the hands of the patriarchy as well. Like we toxic masculinity is does nobody any good. Not even the men it quote unquote benefits. Like it doesn't. It sets up an impossible societal standard and it stunts us emotionally. It's just oh, there's a lot to sift through with it. But to those who got through this and gave me a chance, I thank you. And I look forward to talking in the next one. So take care. Bye bye.